A packed house in Olympia greets lawmakers holding public hearings on new gun restrictions. With Democratic control of the state Senate, a package of bills aimed at creating new restrictions on guns gets a hearing for the first time in years. Lawmakers couldn't hear from everyone who wanted to speak, but they did hear powerful testimony from people on both sides of the debate. A large crowd of concerned citizens filled a Senate committee chamber and two overflow rooms as lawmakers heard arguments for and against a string of gun-related bills. According to the chair of the Senate Law and Justice Committee, nearly 1,000 people signed in, either in favor of or in opposition to the bills. And more than 300 people signed in to testify. The bills include a ban on bump stocks.
Bump firing is the act of using the recoil of a semi-automatic firearm to fire shots in rapid succession.
Among those testifying in support of new restrictions were survivors of the Las Vegas mass shooting and family members of victims who didn't survive.
On October 1st of this year, my daughter, Carrie Parsons, was murdered in Las Vegas in the mass shooting. Saying that is very hard for me. I spent most of my time down there talking to coroners and morticians and funeral directors. We just wanted to get our daughter home, our family home. Carrie was killed by an AR-15 assault rifle that was fitted with a bumper slide modification. This information was given to me by an FBI agent assigned to us. I don't know much about guns personally. The bumper slide modification applied to the gun that killed my daughter is also known as a trigger modification. Without the modification, an AR-15, according to the manufacturer, shoots 45 rounds per minute. So a little, roughly, 1 round per second, a little less than that. According to the audio recordings taken the night of the Las Vegas shooting, the bump stock modification on the AR-15 that murdered Carrie increased the gun's rate of fire to 9 rounds per second. Think of that. A 30-round magazine could be emptied in just over 3 seconds. You don't have to be a good marksman for this gun to kill 58 people and injure 500. No one was targeted. They were all mowed down. Nobody stood a chance. If the gun was in the room right now, none of us could run fast enough.
This bill prohibits possession of so-called trigger devices that allegedly increase the rate of fire of some semi-automatic firearms. While the bill references bump stocks, it goes far beyond those devices. These devices do not turn a semi-automatic firearm into a machine gun. In fact, sometimes it lowers the rate of firepower and accuracy, as happened to the horrible shooter in Las Vegas, whose bump stocks jammed the firearms, and as a result, he had to put them down and pick up other guns to fire with. So there's a lot of misinformation with regard to what they really can do and accomplish.
I'm speaking in sort of support for 5992, but also opposition. The number of so-called bump stocks in this state is rather limited. I'm fairly involved in the firearms community. I know 2 people in the state that have them. They're not particularly accurate. I would dare say it's the least popular item in the pro-gun community to be worried about in this particular series of events. But I would like to caution that this does need to make sure that the wording doesn't restrict traditional trigger jobs or action jobs, which are designed to make the gun more accurate and smoother to operate. Smoothness and accuracy are safety issues. And as has already been mentioned here, outlawing legally owned property does require some compensation for the people that have purchased them. So to those who look forward to buying a bump stock, I'm kind of disappointing you because I don't think there's a real urge to keep those around now.
Other bills being debated include a proposed ban on high-capacity magazines, which hold more than 10 rounds each, and a bill to require enhanced background checks and place other restrictions on assault weapon sales.
With regard to the magazine bill, 6049, it prohibits the future sale and transfer of magazines with a capacity of more than 10 rounds. These are not high-capacity magazines. They're simply standard capacity magazines as originally designed for and provided with certain firearms. They've been used for well over a half a century in a variety of rifles and pistols. They are most commonly used in rifle competitions sanctioned by the federal government and our state. The governor assigns the governor's 20 certificates each year for the top 10 competitive rifle and pistol shooters in the state. The greater impact of the magazine ban would be on handgun owners. More than 500,000 Washington residents are licensed to carry a concealed handgun for the personal protection, and preferred firearm is a semi-automatic pistol. The most popular selling handguns these days almost all have capacity magazines over 10 rounds.
Despite being some of the most commonly owned, semi-automatic firearms are only used in a very small % of violent crime. Police reports and studies have found these so-called assault weapons are only used in 1 to 2% of violent crimes. Looking at 5 years of recent data, there are 9 times as many murders with knives, blunt objects, and hands and feet as there are with rifles of any type, yet semi-automatic rifles remain the target of assault weapons legislation. A standard manufacturer-supplied magazine generally holds more than 10 rounds. These so-called large capacity magazines make up about half of all of magazines owned in the United States. Following the magazine ban at the federal level, a congressional study found that the 10-round limit on magazines had no impact on crime, and it did not have an effect on multiple victim crimes. Treating semi-automatic firearms and standard capacity magazines differently under the state law will do nothing to impact crime in the state, but will only limit law-abiding gun owners and their ability to utilize them for self-defense purposes.
As a U.S. Army officer, I learned how to safely handle, store, and I enjoyed shooting. As an intensive care unit nurse and nurse practitioner at Harborview Medical Center for 10 years, I witnessed the consequences of gun misuse. The blood and holes in human skin, the swollen bodies from IV fluids and countless blood products, and families torn with unimaginable guilt and lifelong grief.
We survived due to wise decisions and pure luck. I am testifying here today to give you a clear perspective of the destruction of assault weapons. The physical wounds I saw that evening varied from bumps and bruises all the way to gunshot wound to the heart. And yes, I saw everything in between. Who do you stop and help? A woman shot in the chest and not breathing, or the hundreds of people I saw hiding who were looking for some type of security? Assault weapons took multiple lives that night. I did my best to keep one of the victims I helped alive, but he was shot in the heart, and although he was conscious, did not make it in the end. Fast forward to a time where these weapons are not accessible to private citizens. I am testifying here today in support of bills 5444, 5992, 6049, as they will help us move towards a safer world where mass shootings no longer occur.
Today in our state, it is as easy to buy an assault weapon as it is to buy a traditional hunting rifle. It is easier to get an assault weapon in our state than it is to get a handgun. This needs to change, and we have the opportunity to make that change now.
We're very concerned about lives that are lost also. We understand the trauma of violence, what it does to the families. Violence in any country is pretty rampant. And Washington State could also help be more proactive other than just banning equipment, rifles, and ammunition, or magazines, excuse me, and provide more education, more awareness, especially through schools. I teach my children and our tribal children in the summertime. We have a summer program, and they learn a firearm as a tool. You hunt with it, it takes a life. You respect that. You don't hurt anybody. You respect people. You respect life. For expanded background checks, we have a system that has flaws. From what I've read and what I've seen, that we have data with the military that doesn't get through the system. We also have data at tribal courts that do not make it to this system. Washington State does not recognize protection orders from Indian country. That needs to change. So we oppose all the bills proposed today. We feel that there's other avenues and things that the state can do to protect citizens and also honor firearms. Thank you.
There's been some powerful testimony from people who are victims of the mass shooting down in Las Vegas. I myself, when I was 15, got caught in the middle of a gunfight over in Bremerton and actually saw a man die right on the street there. But that hasn't changed my opinion about the firearms and my opposition to these bills. These bills are not going to affect the criminals. The only people these bills are going to affect are the law-abiding citizens. The criminals aren't going to be penalized by these bills. They're going to make criminals out of the law-abiding gun owners. If you really wanted to make an impact on firearm safety, why don't you start addressing the mental health issues and making mental health much more accessible to the general public?
Washington State places fewer restrictions on assault weapons than we do on handguns. We prohibit those younger than 21 from purchasing handguns and require a waiting period of up to 10 days for all purchase of handguns so local law enforcement can perform an enhanced background check. In contrast, 18-year-olds can purchase assault weapons in Washington State. There is no waiting period required to purchase an assault weapon. So just to be clear, if any of us wish to purchase a handgun, we can walk into a Cabela's, but we cannot walk out with that handgun. An 18-year-old or a 19-year-old can walk into that Cabela's, purchase an assault weapon, and walk out with it. When I tell Washingtonians this, they look at me confused. It's the only issue I've ever worked on in my entire public career. When I explain it to a member of the media, they've often said back to me, Bob, that can't be right. That can't be the law in our state. In July 2016, the hypothetical I gave you of a teenager walking into Cabela's to purchase an assault weapon happened. A 19-year-old walked into a Tulalip Cabela's and walked out with an assault weapon and a high-capacity magazine. A few days later, as you know, after reading the instruction manual in his car, he walked into a Mukilteo party and opened fire, murdering 3 teenagers, including his ex-girlfriend, and seriously wounding another. He fled only after emptying his high-capacity magazine.
The bill claims to address assault weapons. It does not. Instead, it takes ordinary firearms that are legitimately owned by millions of Americans and redefines them into something they are not. Assault weapons do exist. Their definition is commonly understood. They're fully automatic firearms used by the military and in Washington State only by the police. Assault weapons have been federally regulated since 1934 and prohibited in Washington since 1994, except for law enforcement. 5444 casually takes ordinary firearms and through the magic of doublespeak would make them into something they are not. For the record, let me state the obvious. The rifles that possess many of the features that 5444 includes in its definitions have been owned and used by the public since the 1960s. They have been used as sporting rifles, target rifles, and home defense firearms. They are not assault weapons.
There is also a safe storage mandate that would require firearms to be secured in locked storage and create penalties for gun owners if unsecured firearms are accessed by children or stolen and used in other crimes.
I'm here to be the voice of my brother, Glenn Morgan Bell, who was shot and killed September 12, 1978. He was 15. It was after school on the way home to his friend or classmate talked him into going to his house, and in the house there was a handgun, a .44 Magnum, and my brother was shot point blank range. And I am been suffering through all these years with anger and just depression and a lot of that going in my head. I'm just wanted to say that I want to support the passing of the bills.
It's my right to be able to protect myself, to be able to easily access my firearm in my home in the case of an intruder, to protect myself and my family. This bill makes me a criminal rather than the person invading my home. I responsibly store my firearm in my home with the doors locked and the security system on. And again, if someone's entering my home, threatening myself and my family, it's really important for me to be able to protect myself.
During a simple sibling fight, my brother got that gun to scare me. He carelessly pointed it at me and he pulled the trigger. I nearly died, and I've spent years recovering. My brother wasn't bad. He was a teenager. Teenagers are impulsive. They do things that we don't expect. My parents thought that they had done everything right, but they hadn't. That's why I'm here to support dangerous access prevention.
Several years ago, I opened my front door and confronted two men in my home. These men were uninvited, and their intentions were for harm. It is a woman's right to own firearms for personal protection. It levels the fight between her and an attacker. In my case, two. It gives her a fighting chance to survive. When seconds count and moments matter, a locked firearm or magazine is helpless in a personal defense situation. This bill, I stand before you with, as a crime survivor today. I don't want to be a crime statistic. I want to be able to protect myself.
Instead of pursuing a specific change to state gun law, one bill would give cities and counties more authority to pass local gun ordinances by removing a statewide preemption.
If someone comes in and flies a model airplane, I can call the police. But if someone walks into that park carrying a gun, they haven't done anything wrong until they've aimed it at someone. By then, of course, we know that it would be too late to call the police. Restoring local authority over firearms empowers municipalities to adopt and enforce reasonable firearms protections in public places, park by park, community by community, taking into account the unique features of individual places, like, for example, a park shared by an elementary school.
The state of Washington's wise and reasonable preemption statutes ensures law-abiding people and law enforcement officers alike can rely on a well-considered, consistent framework of laws from county to county and town to town. This bill would allow local governments across the state to put good people at risk of accidental law violations and severely chill the exercise of fundamental individual rights under the Second Amendment and state constitutions. This bill has many flaws, but one clear intent: to undermine and chill the exercise of fundamental individual rights. If this measure were about marriage, bookstores, churches, liquor stores, cars, hospitals, voting, or abortion clinics, it would be dead on arrival. And so should 6146 be roundly and summarily rejected.
The Senate Law and Justice Committee approved the bill to ban bump stocks by a 3-4 vote. It now goes to the Senate Rules Committee.